Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, Jennifer, I'm just going to dive right in and ask, out of all the places that you've been to and traveled to, why did you choose to move to France? And then from all the beautiful places in France, because there's many, how did it come about that you chose Swove?
Well, this is a bit of a long story, but I can try to make it short. I left the US in 2006 to move to Yemen. Yemen had not been on my list of places I wanted to live, but I was offered a job as the editor-in-chief of a newspaper there. Yemen turned out to be my favorite country in which we've ever lived, but that's another story. I met my husband, who's British, in Yemen. And at the time at which we decided that we should probably own a home, so we met relatively late in life. So I didn't own anything because I'd lived in Manhattan my whole life. And in Manhattan, everybody rents. People don't own things, generally speaking, unless you're a millionaire. So I'd always been renting. I moved in with Tim with 2 suitcases worth of possessions. Tim had a home in the UK, but I lost it in a divorce. And so the two of us had no permanent home when we began our relationship. So we ended up staying in Yemen for 4 years, but we didn't have a home anywhere else. Um, and when our daughter was around 3, we were then living in Bolivia, and we thought we should have somewhere that's a little stable for her since we're moving constantly. Um, so we should probably try to own something. And Tim had always wanted to live in France. He had spent a lot of time in France. He taught in France and spoke beautiful French, speaks beautiful French. And he speaks 7 languages, but French is among his best. And I also happen to speak French better than I speak other languages because that's what I had studied. And I had also spent time in France doing manual labor in my when I was 20. And
Okay.
so we thought, okay, France sounds good. Let's look around France. But neither of us had any idea what part of France we wanted to live in. We were looking at maps and regions thinking, oh my gosh, this country's huge and there's all these different places and we don't know anything about them. We don't know which parts of the country might suit our personalities best. I think
Mm.
if I had been making the decision alone, I probably would have chosen Paris or another large city simply because I am a city person. I don't think I realized how much I'm a city person until I settled in this village. Uh, but we
I
can,
can understand that. I'm very much a city person. I do enjoy breaks from the city and
yeah,
getting away and enjoying nature in the mountains and a little bit
yes,
of kind of quiet time, but I
yes,
am a city person at heart.
I am too. And my husband would be perfectly happy alone on the top of a mountain where he never saw anyone. So living in a village was a compromise. I said, as long as I can walk, it's a big enough village so that I can walk to a cafe, a restaurant, a bar, a boulangerie, more than one. There's a farmer's market. I can walk to everything I need within the village. There's even a clinic and a pharmacy here. So it's not, so it is, you can manage without a car. I mean, you need a car if you're gonna travel
Right.
around, but like you can survive if you're stuck. Um, but this village, um, I first came to this village when I was 20 years old. I had been studying theater in London. So I was a theater major as an undergraduate. I currently make my living as an author, but I started out as an actor. And when I was studying theater in London, my favorite teacher was a man named Bill Homewood, who performed a lot in the West End and in TVs and television shows and movies. And his wife, Estelle Kohler, was an actress with the Royal Shakespeare Company. And when I finished my time in the UK and I headed off to France, they said, well, we've got a home in Sauve in the Gare. Why don't you stop by in your travels and visit? So this was during a time where there was no internet. I couldn't make phone calls. In fact, when I left home, my parents had said, please don't call home. It's too expensive. And, if you're dying,
I do remember that time. I do
yeah,
remember when those either collect calls or those long
right.
distance calls were very expensive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I sent postcards. But anyway, so I showed up on the doorstep of Estelle and Bill's home, and I spent time. Bill wasn't here, but Estelle was here with her South African nephew. She's from South Africa. And I meant to just spend a night, maybe two, but we were having such a good time together that I ended up staying. I don't know how long I stayed. It could have been a couple of weeks. I don't know exactly. This was
Wow.
a while ago. I am no longer 20.
Right.
Um, But so I enjoyed being in Sove, and
Mhm.
Estelle, who's an amazing cook, would go out into the mountains behind the village and pick the herbs for our dinner every night. And she would cook by candlelight. And Sove is a medieval village, so it's a walled stone village, and it's very beautiful. Um, and so I thought, this is great, but I can't imagine ever living here. It's so far from, life. Again,
Right.
I'd come from London, and I was you know, a city person. Uh, and so I forgot so I didn't forget about so, but then, you know, another 20, 20 something years passes, and we're looking for a place to live in France. And a friend of ours we met in Yemen offered us her home in a little village called Pompignan. And so we stayed in her home. And when the first day we drove around the area. So we just explored this area because we had a friend with a home here, essentially. It's kind of
Mhm.
like, where do we have a friend we can use as a base to explore the region? So
Hmm.
we ultimately explored three different regions. And this one we explored only because we had a friend here. Staying at her house, we drove by Sove, and I thought, is that the same Sove I stayed at when I was 20 years old? And I got back in touch with my friend Bill and Estelle, and they're still around here. They're not in this village, but they're nearby.
Mhm.
And then they helped us look around for things, and we walked in this house when we'd given up pretty much because we looked at so many wrecks of houses, and because that's what was in our price range. Um, and then we walked in this house, and the second I got inside, I thought, this house is meant to be ours. Um,
That's it's interesting because I've spoken to a few people that have had the same or similar type experience that they have looked and looked and looked, and they were just almost at the point of giving up, and some have taken a break for a year of even looking, and then all of a sudden they say that this one comes about, they find it, somebody calls them and lets them know, and it they just instantly know this is the right one for me.
I think, and it also, the woman who was living here and selling the house at the time was quite taken with our family, and she decided that this was the family she wanted to be living in the house. So that was a huge part of it. Um, there was a brief time during which the deal fell through because she acquired a new boyfriend because she was leaving the house because she couldn't navigate the steps anymore due to medical issues. But then the boyfriend was helping her. But then, so we were crushed and we thought we'd lose the house. And we were living in Bolivia at the time, and they have this festival of tiny things where they make miniatures of everything. And
Okay.
that includes little houses. And you buy and give to people little miniatures of things that you want to come into your life.
Okay.
So we thought, well, why not buy a little house? Because we want this
Mhm.
house to come back in our life. So we got this little house, put it in our home in Bolivia. And then the woman who owned the home in France called and said she changed her mind and she wanted us to have the house again. Um, Bolivian magic. So
Very nice.
yeah. So yeah, that's how we came to settle here. And it was kind of accidental that it turned out to be a good village for us in many ways, in that it's populated almost exclusively by artists. It's
Mm.
a lot of visual artists, but also musicians, clowns, circus performers, a couple other novelists. Um, so it's My friend Bill calls it the Greenwich Village of France because it's so full of creative people. So
Excellent.
yeah, it's a place where there's just a lot of eccentrics, and I feel most at home among eccentrics and
Mm.
artistic people. And as a writer, it's
It's
good.
creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I love,
absolutely.
yeah, and I'm inspired by visual artists. And so it's
Mm.
be around them as well. So.
So a couple of things then. How was purchase process? Was it fairly similar or smooth as to what we would expect within North America, or was it kind of a long, drawn out, frustrating process
Do you mean the process of buying the
of
house?
buying the house? Yes.
Um, it actually went pretty smoothly.
Good.
Um, and which is all the more remarkable given that because we were in Bolivia, our friend Bill, we gave him power of attorney to sign all the paperwork for us.
Mhm.
I think we were able to meet with the notaire ourselves at some point. I can't remember if that was before or after the sale, but it actually went pretty smoothly.
Oh, good.
We made a down payment. We got a mortgage from a French bank, which
Mhm.
getting the mortgage, of course, required opening accounts in that bank. So we went to the bank, opened accounts, and then applied for the mortgage. And the biggest hurdle we had at the bank itself was that they refused to allow me to open an account in my own name. In other words, so I've never changed my name. My name is Jennifer Steil. My husband's last
Mhm.
name is Torlo, but I've never taken his name because I publish under my own name. I have a career under my own name, and we have
Yeah,
different.
it wouldn't make sense to change it.
No. And so at the bank, they said, okay, what's your name? I said, Jennifer Style. And they said, no, no, what's your married name? And I said, my married name is Jennifer Style. And they said, no, 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 your married name. And I'm like, this is my married name. And I have no other name. And they said, no, but like you have to use your husband's name to open this account. And I said, but that's not my name. I don't have a single piece of identification with Torlo as my surname on it. If anyone ever asks me for proof that I am Jennifer Torlo, I will not be able to provide it because I am not Jennifer Torlo. Um, and this failed to persuade the bank. Um,
Wow.
at which point Tim kind of elbows me and says, look, we need the mortgage. Like, can you just pipe down for so I opened
But
this
I understand because you don't want them to come back and say, okay, well, now give us ID with
right,
this name on it because you're like,
right.
but I can't.
Right, exactly. And that actually, I mean, it happened once. So I opened this account in this fictional name. And we met when we were older. So again, we've always had separate bank accounts and everything like that. I'm just used to having my own independent income, my own independent banking. But for the
Right.
purposes of the mortgage, we have a joint account and then we each have individual accounts. But my individual account was under a fictional name. And there was one point at which, when you're traveling, I'm guessing this has happened to you and your bank cuts off your debit card because you're moving too much.
Yep. I've had it happen a few times.
Yeah. And so
And it's embarrassing because you go to pay and they're like, it's not working. I'm like, oh,
right,
oh yes, there's
right,
more than enough in there. And they're like, it's not working.
right. And so then you have to call the bank,
Yeah.
convince them that they're you and that the charges are valid, et cetera. So I
Yeah.
call the bank and they ask me my name and they're like, oh no, you got your name wrong. We can't approve this. And I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I didn't want to happen. But
Right.
there is a happy ending in that we got a different, whatever you call the person who overlooks our accounts. When we were in there having a meeting with her about opening some new accounts, she
Mhm.
finally agreed to change my name on all of our accounts. So now I have accounts in my own name, which apparently is unusual in France. But anyway, that was our only real hurdle. The actual purchase of the house and the getting of the paperwork, that all went
Mhm.
pretty smoothly.
Well, I have to say this is the first time I've heard in such a situation where the bank is adamant of you using a fake name, shall we say?
Yeah.
That's not really you. Um, but glad that they did change that though, because yeah, it can definitely. I could foresee even more problems that that can occur from that. But yeah, that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So you're now settled there full time? Is that right? Or are you guys still doing quite a bit of traveling?
We are, I'm going to say allegedly because you just never know. We're allegedly here permanently in
Okay.
France. And the reason I say that is, so the reason we were moving around so much, I mean, I moved abroad alone, but then met my husband,
Mm,
and we were in Yemen for 4 years, due to the fact that he was the British ambassador to Yemen. Um,
okay.
and so we stayed there for the length of his posting until my daughter and I, my infant daughter and I, were evacuated. Whole different story. We've moved for lots of reasons. Sometimes we were actually, we've probably moved against our will more than we've moved voluntarily. Um,
Wow.
which is also a long story. We've been evacuated. I've been evacuated 3 times. My daughter and I have been evacuated twice. And yeah, for all kinds, what anyway, for all kinds of different reasons. Um, and so then we've moved around quite a lot. And my husband just retired a year and a half ago from the British Foreign Office. And because I am an author and I write books for a living, my career is portable, which is one of the reasons
Right.
our marriage was workable. Because I'm
Mm,
someone who would literally lose my mind if I couldn't work. Um, Work has always been pretty critical to me. So
mm.
I am continuing to work. My husband is retired, although he's not getting a lot of rest because unfortunately I'm in cancer treatment. So that's another
Mm.
thing currently tying me to France. I can't travel anywhere at the moment because I have weekly chemo, and this is the third time I've had this cancer. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, it's things are a bit grim at the moment, but you
Well,
gotta,
you're in a great place. France is been known to be, I think almost, I mean, of course, it depends on which article that you're reading, but it's always in, I would say, the top three best places in the world for medical and healthcare. So it definitely is a great place.
yes, I have very few complaints about the healthcare. First of all, 100% of my care is free, which, given that I come from the US, where you pay
That's
a fortune for absolutely everything, even if you have insurance, feels like a miracle. So it
mm,
feels like a miracle every time I go and I don't have to pay anything. Um,
right.
that's wonderful. I mean, all my appointments are run efficiently and on time, and the hospital's been wonderful. The chemo nurses have interesting stories to tell. So it's been a good experience. I mean, I also have
Mm,
experience with the healthcare in the UK, which has its problems, but is also free.
mhm.
And I actually experienced quite good cancer care there. The NHS struggles in a lot of ways, but their cancer care is actually quite good. So, um,
I find coming from Canada, where our healthcare is, I know we say free. I don't really like to use that word in the sense of most times, like in France, in Canada, our taxes are higher
right,
than, say, the United States, but it covers that cost. So, I mean, that we're still kind of paying for it, but definitely not like they pay in the United States. And I do find that in a lot of cases where we do have the public system, there's definitely challenges. The waits for some things that are more non-urgent care, we'll say
right.
like a hip, knee replacement, those types of things. I'm sure very painful in waiting, non-urgent. But in the times where I've talked with people and experienced with my mom going through cancer, the treatment has been great in those places. And I couldn't even imagine what it would be like for Bill in the United States for that ongoing treatment of months.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be bankrupt if we were living in the US. I mean, there's just no question. Um, because I've been through so much chemotherapy, massive surgery to remove most of my abdomen, like, so much that would have, sunk us in the United States. And I have a close friend who lives in Paris who lost a child to cancer, and he was 5. And again, if she had had to pay for his care, they wouldn't have just lost a child, they would also be bankrupt. And so, she was grateful for the care that she was able to get for her son, although unfortunately they were unable to save him. But that's cancer.
Yeah, it's yeah, unfortunately. And healthcare itself, even, up until just recently, I've always been extremely healthy, no health problems. Like I would get cold maybe once every few years.
Right.
And I happened to be in the United States, and I ended up I was first having some stomach problems. I'm like, something's not right. And then a bit of time went by, and I knew, I'm like, I'm going to need surgery. Like, I know something's really not right, but I'm in the United States and I want to wait till I get back to Spain where, I live there. I've got a place. I've got like doctors, and I'm not in the United States. But unfortunately, I couldn't wait, and I ended up going into Emerge, and they said, "Yeah, you're not going anywhere. You're having 2 emergency surgeries tomorrow."
Wow.
And yeah, so went through that, and then I was supposed to have follow-up surgery, which was supposed to be about 4 weeks later, and I kept calling to get an appointment, calling, and it led to over 8 weeks later. And so I just went into Emerge. I was feeling pretty much fine when I went into Emerge, but I really wanted to get this follow-up done because they had put in a stent and I wanted it removed. It's like a foreign object in my body, and I kind of want it out. And their documents say 4 weeks. We're now over 8 weeks. And have moments of discomfort and pain and things like that. But I mean, not enough that I wouldn't go to the ER if I didn't know that I was should have had this follow-up by now. And I went in and they did a CT scan and stuff. And then the chief medical doctor came down to my emergency room, and he's like, "You're not going anywhere." And like all of a sudden, 3 nurses were in the room. They're hooking me up to IVs and antibiotics. And he's like, "You have a major infection, and we need to check your blood, and we need to do all these things." And he's like, "How's the pain? Like we can." And in my head, I'm thinking, I don't really have pain right now. And I ended up being in there 5 days. I spent one night in ICU, and they did a temporary fix because they couldn't actually do the full surgery. So I'm still in need of getting the appropriate fix done, and that will be either one. I'm hoping just one more surgery, maybe two. It depends. I'm hoping once um, I'm in a couple of weeks well, actually about a week, I'll be back in Barcelona. Um, to hopefully get everything just finally resolved and done and stuff. So it's healthcare. Now I realize 2 things when people are looking to kind of move abroad, like what now that I see as core things. Obviously, we have to love the place, and it has to have great weather and all of those types of things. But definitely healthcare that's either affordable, depending upon, how much money somebody makes. Maybe it is affordable for some people in the US if they make really good money, but definitely good healthcare. And then also the other thing is community. And that's really important because it really did kind of suck being in the hospital all by myself because I had no friends or family there.
That community is huge, huge.
Mm.
I mean, that has become that word comes up so often for me. It comes up in my work because, as a writer, my work is very solitary, which means I really crave the company and community of other people, like both friends of all stripes, but also writer friends. Like literary community is really important to me, and that has been tough because I write in English. I do not write in French. And I have not yet found a literary community here, um, with other writers, because I love the way, with my writing communities in France and England, we really support each other. We promote each other's work. We offer each other classes. We like mentor each other. There's all just kind of relationships that are very
Hmm.
fruitful in all kinds of ways, both emotional and professional. Um, and I don't have that in France, and that's hard. We do have community in our village, which is nice. There are people who will offer to help us if we're in need. But again, even though we bought this house in 2013, we've only been here permanently for a year and a half. And so I think people are just getting used to seeing us on a more regular basis. And it's not like these aren't lifelong friends. They aren't. It's the thing is that when I think, okay, where are my communities? Well, the problem is they're everywhere. There isn't one place I could go and have all my friends around me.
Right. Right.
Like they're in New York, Norway, France, Singapore, Japan. They're all over. And so that's the hard thing about moving around is it's great that you have friends in so many places, but it also means that you don't see them every day. Uh,
Right. It's a
and that's
double-edged sword.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, I guess I've never had because I've never had like I was recently reading um what's it called? Oh, You Could Make This Place Beautiful. Um
Okay.
it's by Maggie Smith. It's a book of poetry and she's a beautiful poet, but what I find most interesting about her, which is kind of strange of me, is that she grew up in Ohio and has never left her hometown.
Mm.
And I can't imagine this. I can't even imagine any possible reason to stay in one place for your entire life. And I read her stories and I think, well, okay, there are some things I envy. Like I envy that she can walk next door and she knows her neighbors and she has community. And so I get the richness of all of that. Um, and that's something that I do wish I had, but I guess I'm not willing to stay long enough anywhere for it to happen.
Well, that's when I find those are the benefits and challenges, right? And there are benefits to that. I look at some of my friends who I've known for 20 plus years, and they live in the city now, and they've been in that city. So back in Canada, when I was there, and we met when I was in my late teens and into early 20s, and they're still there. And there is that part that they have all their family there. There's, all the birthday parties, the Christmases, the Easters, they know their neighbors now. In some cases, not everybody gets along with their neighbors. So I'm kind of like, okay, I get that. But they really kind of have that community. Even a friend of mine said, with where I'm at right now in Montenegro at the moment, she said, if something happens before you get back to Barcelona, like, do you have somebody to call? And I said, well, I mean, yes, but no. Like I know some people, but I wouldn't, I said if I fell down the stairs and broke my leg and needed somebody to go to the grocery store for me once a week to do stuff, no. If it's a one-time thing, yes, I know some people that I'm sure would be willing to help, that odd time, but not enough. And as sort of like you, it's because here I'm not here very often. I'm here a few weeks at a time, maybe a couple months, and then I'm gone for several, and I come back again. So it is a bit different with this, but that it's really been over the last year and especially the last few months now, that sense of community. And I know that I'm also looking to relocate again. So when I look at the next destination, those things that are specific for me, definitely weather, because it has a huge impact on me. Like I hate being cold. I just don't like it. Part of the reason why I left Canada. Healthcare important now after having this. I mean, I'll probably be fine again for another 20 years, but you never know. And then a place though where I know where I'm gonna be spending a good portion of time, because as adults, it is bit harder and takes us longer, I find, to build that community, especially for people like you or I who work from home. And it's great that we have that flexibility to move around, but it's harder to meet people. So what I loved about Barcelona when I first got there was all the co-working spaces. And I would go to co-working twice a week, and that was great because we would work and then generally we would all have lunch together, and that lunchtime it would be, "Hey, does somebody know whatever, a person who builds websites? Does somebody know a person who can do this?" Or, "I'm looking for that." Or, "Hey, can somebody, give me their opinion on something I'm working for?" Or even, "I'm looking for this specific thing that I used to be able to get in my home country. Where would I even find it here? Is it possible?" And we really helped out. Initially, it would just start, from those lunches, from that, and then you connect and get to know each other and end up building relationships. And I have still some great friends that I met from those co-working spaces.
That's really great. I mean, there's a co-working space just opened this year in our village, and I've been meaning to check it out, for this very reason. But the problem is I have this really cozy home office. And it's really hard to get me out of here. But I would love to, a friend recently sent me, when I was a journalist in New York, I worked for various magazines and whatnot. And at one point I was working at a magazine and our whole staff were women and we loved each other and we had it's the happiest time I ever had. Just completely free of men. It was brilliant. Um, and uh Anyway, when I left the magazine, they'd made a fake front page of the magazine with all these funny headlines about me. And so a friend recently she dug up that magazine cover and sent it to me on as a text. And I thought, gosh, I really miss having colleagues. Like I loved having colleagues, people to talk to throughout the day and meet at the coffee machine and all of that. So yeah, I probably should check out my local co-working space because I don't want it to close either. I want it to stay open. And I'm worried about it doesn't seem to be overly populated because, we are a small village, but so maybe I should go support it.
Yeah, go support it, meet maybe some more people, or just get to know people a little bit better. But those are for me, those are key things. And I think for anybody who's listening or watching, it's think about the type of person you are. If they're more like us, who I love being around people, and don't get me wrong, I never went to co-working every day. I would go a couple days a week, because sometimes it is nice to just work from home and not have to worry about going anywhere. But those couple of days a week are great. And other people could be more like your husband, as you said, who enjoys being alone, could be by themselves all the time, and that's great. So when considering moving abroad or picking a destination or figuring out what's best, we really need to look in at ourselves and think, what do I enjoy doing? What do I like? What's really important to me? And do I want to be around people 5 days a week? And find, that definitely more than one co-working space perhaps is ideal for me. Or, I like to work from home, but a couple days is good. So is there at least one co-working space where I can go? And I find in Europe as well, through a lot of places, there's the dedicated co-working spaces, and then sometimes hotels and different places will offer a co-working space. So the one that I initially went to in Barcelona was in the back of a restaurant. They had the restaurant, and then they had this huge back area, and we would just pay for whatever we consumed. So we would have, most of us would have coffee or something in the morning when we got there, and we would work, and then we would all have lunch, and then after lunch, sometimes most of us would get back to work. Some people would just continue chatting, and some people would just um, go home and only stay half a day. And then we even had some people that would come in and join us just for lunch, and then go. So it was a great way. And there's not just one way of having it. So it's finding. And I think that when people are doing scouting trips or considering, like always visit a place before you go. But those are the things we need to think about, not just through the eyes of being on vacation, because it's completely different.
That's true. In fact, I just last week I wrote a column because I see a lot of my friends' social media posts, people when they are traveling around on vacation and they're like, "Oh, France is perfect, it's romantic, and the food is perfect and all that." And I think, okay, let's look at the realities of, first of all, the politics of France. Let's look at the rise of anti-Semitism and the rise of Islamophobia. And let's look at the swing towards the far right. And like, this is not a fairy tale land. It's a country that's complicated. And that's what tourists do not see. And so, I mean, my piece was more focused on the politics, but I was pointing out that Americans who are very tempted to flee the country right now for very good reason, um, they might want to take a look at the politics of all these other countries of Europe before they move, because that will affect them. It will affect who their neighbors are. Uh, and 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 what you just said, that living somewhere is very different from being a tourist. And that's the kind of thing people need to think about. Is like, okay, what kind of community, what are your politics? Is it important to you to be around people who share your political views, who share your values? Is it important to you, you know that you feel safe if you are Jewish or Muslim or any other kind of oppressed person? It's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
So there's so many things to take into account. And of course, another friend of mine who lives in Europe said, he's like, and also, we can't assume that these countries want us.
Well, that actually is a good point. I mean, I think right now, almost globally, and I know it's not going to be, I am, kind of putting everything into one basket, which isn't completely accurate or right. But there's definitely a lot of countries that just don't want any more immigration at all. I
Yes.
think right now that if a lot of countries could, or the people of the countries, taking out the politics part of it, but if the people of countries could just pause all immigration, like just all of it, solid pause, no more,
Mhm.
and deal with what's going on. I mean, I'm all for immigration, but I'm all for legal immigration, to do it the right ways. That's why, people have laws, because every country wants to, protect their own. And I get it, because one thing that I get a bit disappointed and a bit sad of seeing is, even when I travel and I'm going places and I see things that are not really culturally part of that country. So I'll give some examples. Like, I love Italy. It's one of my favorite countries. But every time I see this McDonald's in Italy, I just think, why? Especially, like, I get that in not that it shouldn't be there at all, but when you're in like the old city and like the core of it, and it's all this ancient buildings that have been around for thousands of years, and then you see this McDonald's sign hanging off the building, and I just think it just takes away, like, have it, but maybe, it just takes away from me being in Italy, or and I'm in a restaurant and then they're playing top 40 North American music. I'm like,
Oh,
I can get
yeah.
that so many places. Like, I want to experience traditional Italy. And I find that it's happening in all countries that are kind of losing that tradition. And even sometimes with shopping and buying trinkets and things, I look and I'm like, I've seen those wooden bowls in 30 different countries. They're not unique to this place. I've seen, and again, of course, there's the fridge magnets, there's the whatever, but things that people think, oh, I bought this. It's like, yeah, but I've seen those exact same things in 30 countries. They're not being made here. They're not traditional to this. And for me, travel is part of the tradition, seeing what it is. Because if I can have all of those things at home, why am I spending the money and the time to go somewhere to have the same things I can get at home? That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I can't stand the American influence abroad because I don't want to see McDonald's either, but and I also don't want to shop in chain stores that are from the UK or the US, or these global chain stores that have zero relationship to their environment and their cultural context. I don't I don't they feel soulless and and kind of detached from where they exist. Um, so yeah, I really don't, I despise the ubiquitousness of Coca-Cola and McDonald's and all of that. It's really impossible to escape the US. It kind of, I can understand why people might resent us for like, ruining their diet for one, but
Mm.
just it's just we kind of spread ourselves everywhere. And I'm like, I left the US because I wanted to be away from the US. I don't want the US to follow me everywhere. Um,
I get that completely. And so at the same time, when people it irritates me when people say, "Oh, well, in the US or in, Canada, the UK, whatever their home country is, um, that they're expecting things to be the way that they are in a new country." And it irritates me. It's like, no, you came to this country. If you don't like the laws, if you don't like the rules, if you don't like the hours of operation of the store, and because where I'm at, things are still closed on Sunday. I'm okay with that. I just know I need to buy stuff on Saturday if I want. Sunday, everything's closed. I mean, there's still restaurants that are open, and it's not like I'm not going to starve to death in one day if things are closed or if I'm not able to go buy something because I don't need it anyway. But trying to change it. I mean, the reason why we leave, whatever those reasons are, you know, we we don't want those. I like, as you said, we don't want those things to follow us. We want the different experience, the different culture, the different things. Um, and it frustrates me when people try to change it to make it their home countries, then I always say, well, then just back to your home country if those are the things that you want and that you like.
right. Right. I mean, that's important. I mean, that you got to do your homework,
Mm.
clearly before you decide to settle somewhere, and be sure that you understand. I mean, like you, things are closed Sundays here, but not only that, like nothing's open Monday either. And then, there's nothing open between noon and 3. Um,
Yeah.
and so, sure, that's a little bit inconvenient if you need to go to the pharmacy or something like that. But at the same time, if I were working in a different job, if I were working in an office or somewhere else, I'd be thrilled to have a 3-hour lunch. So that's the French tradition. And I wouldn't dream of trying to convince the French to keep their stores open all day long, that it's probably much healthier to take long lunches than to do what
Mm.
Americans do and just get takeout and eat it at your desk. So, who am I to quibble with this with this practice?
Right, right. And so, a lot of people will make quick decisions about leaving. And I think it is important to really look at the big picture of why are you leaving? Because if you're unhappy, and I get that, but why are you unhappy? But it is that saying, and I've said it before, if you're unhappy with you, you are going with you, and you will be there with you. So if you are the problem, you need to fix you. And that's what that unhappiness comes with. Like, I get if there's other there's so many reasons to leave a place. But first it's being 100% honest with yourself. This is my situation. This is what I don't like. This is why I want to leave. These are the things that I really want. And I always say to people, make a huge list and then break it down and think, okay, is it really that important? And then what are those non-negotiables? And some of them, as we talked about, having community, healthcare, political situation, which politics can change, but as it is right now within the country or countries that you're looking at, or kind of how it has been over the last several years. What are the major languages? Is there one? Is there more than one? Do you know it? Do you want to learn it? What are the religions or the major religions? How are those beliefs what is the culture, the lifestyle of things are closed on Sundays and Mondays. Things are closed every afternoon, and so you need to adjust to that and look at those things with open eyes to then make that decision of, yes, this is acceptable or no, it's not. And it could vary a bit because even in France, if you were in Paris, not everything is shutting down on Sundays and Mondays or in the afternoon. Some things may not. But sometimes, even if you're set on a country, great, you've decided that country. Now let's look at specific regions and areas because, again, politically, religious, weather, all of those are going to vary if you think of France north to south, east to west.
A- absolutely. Absolutely. I think that I was fortunate in that our life working, in the diplomatic community, and m having to move, being kind of not choosing where we go. I mean, Tim applied for jobs and then got them various places, and then we would move there. But it wasn't like we could pick any country we wanted to and go there. In fact, the kind of countries Tim was interested in working on weren't necessarily the same kind of country you would choose to settle in forever, because he wanted countries that needed more help than, so that's more interesting to work on a country that is evolving more than a country that kind of is doing okay. Um, and I feel that living in all these different countries and learning the languages and learning about the culture and having to do that, because in Bolivia, no one spoke English. If you don't learn Spanish, you are not going to have very many friends. So you learn the importance of learning the language. You learn the importance of various cultural traditions, and that was a big education for me. Um, Spending 4 years in each country is a long time, and it does give you a sense of how different it is to live somewhere than to be there as a tourist. And so that was something I learned kind of before my husband retired and we settled here. Um, and I think the other thing it taught me was that there is no perfect country.
Or it's not.
There are countries that maybe even we think are perfect, but then if you live there, like, I might think, oh, Scandinavia is perfect. And then like I go to Norway to see my friend there, and then you hear them complain about various like Norwegian things, and you're like, okay, so
Mm,
maybe nowhere is quite perfect. And I think once you acknowledge that and you're not expecting anywhere to be perfect, that's useful. Lower your
mm,
expectations. Nowhere is perfect. You just have to find somewhere where you can live with the flaws. It's like marriage. You find
mhm.
someone whose flaws, everyone's flawed, right? You find someone whose flaws you can live with.
Right. Absolutely. That's so true, and that's knowing yourself because, as you said with the dating, you can date somebody and other people have, and things didn't work out, and you think that person is ideal for you. It's the same with destinations. I've lived in several countries, I've traveled to many. I've loved them, they've been great, but there's some that I think, "There is no way I would ever live here." I enjoyed my time here, it was wonderful, eye-opening, learned things, great, but to live, absolutely not, where other people would be like, "Oh, I love that place, that's where I wanna live." Great, because we're all different, and our needs, wants, and desires and beliefs are all different, and I always say nobody is right and nobody's wrong, it's just our perspective.
That's exactly right. I mean, it took me a long time to realize, I think, how my assumptions about the world coming from the US were not shared by other people, and that maybe I should release those assumptions. But you have to first realize what your assumptions are. You know,
Yes.
coming from where I came from, I had assumptions about running water being safe to drink. That assumption
Right.
goes out the window immediately, almost anywhere you go. Um,
Yes.
and so, that's just one of many. And it took me a
Mhm.
while to realize kind of how the US shaped me and how that other people have different assumptions and they aren't more or less valid than mine.
No.
Um, and so I might think about not having as few assumptions about the world as possible and just taking things as they come and trying not to judge it through the lens of my Americanness.
Absolutely. Well, Jennifer, I want to thank you very much for your time. I feel like we could continue to speak for a very long time, but I just wanted to, if you could let our listeners and people watching know about some of your books and where they can find your books or follow you on social media or the best place to connect with you.
Sure. I am on most social media. I'm on Facebook. If you look for Jennifer Steil, Steil is my surname. I have a website, jennifersteil.net. I write a weekly newsletter on Substack called Liminal. It's about living between countries and cultures and between illness and health and all kinds of things. And that can be found at jenniferstyle.substack.com. And what else? I just joined Blue Sky. I don't know my handle, but if you look for Jennifer Steil, Steil, it's a relatively new thing. So I'm also on Instagram, Jennifer F Style. And oh, my books, right. So my first book, The Woman Who Fell from the Sky, is a memoir about my year running the newspaper in Yemen and eventually meeting my husband. That book is available almost anywhere books are sold. You can order it from Amazon. If you're in the US, you can order it from bookshop.org. You can also go to your local independent bookstore and ask them to order it if they don't have it. My second book is called The Ambassador's Wife. It's a novel. It starts out with a kidnapping based on one that happened to me. And that can be found same places. You can order it online or ask your local bookstore. And my most recent book is called Exile Music, which is about Austrian refugees in Bolivia during and after World War II. I met some of these survivors when I was living in Bolivia and ended up writing a story about what it was like to recreate your life in the Andes. So Exile Music, again, can be found on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, bookshop.org, independent bookstores. Yeah.
Perfect. And we'll put some of those links in all the show notes to make it easy for people to connect with you.
Okay, great. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you.